Hi guys, and welcome back to the Pulse Social Sports podcast, where this week we're talking to David Melville, an individual who's been involved with British Blind Sports as he works to promote healthy living during the COVID lockdown, whilst also running at-home health sessions for those who are visually impaired. Massive thanks for coming on the show, really, and just thanks for taking the time and talking to us.
No, it's not a problem. I mean, it's going to help spread awareness around VI sport, and that's ultimately what our organisation striving to do more than ever now. So it's great to be sort of invited and be asked to do such things like this.
No, absolutely. So we'll just open out with just a little bit about yourself. You know, who are you, where are you from, and what's your background, really?
Yeah. I'm employed by British Blind Sports, primarily based in the Warwickshire area. However, we operate over a national sort of area. Prior to working at British Blind Sport, I worked in education, and then I also played rugby for a time, and then I have a little bit of a background in personal training and fitness instruction, so that's a little bit about myself.
Oh, nice. And then, so obviously so we'll just jump right in with, how did you become involved with the blind sporting community?
So that's sort of, I suppose, it stems right back to my first involvement with disability sport. So when I was actually at college as a 16-year-old studying sports and exercise science, one of our modules was around disability sport. Although it was very small and there wasn't a heavy focus on visually impaired sports, we did do a lot of work with the local special educational needs school. And what we used to do was deliver PE and sports sessions for their pupils. Now, quite often or not, some of the children there who did have other disabilities did have some visual impairments. So that was probably my first experience for working with someone or a group of people that didn't have full sight. Later, as I sort of got a little bit older, when I then started working in education, actually at the college I studied at, one of my students on one of the personal training courses happened to be visually impaired, and to the degree where, just seeing faces and shapes and the board was almost impossible. So had to really learn to adapt my teaching methods and how I could best support her. And that sort of ultimately led me to where I am today.
Okay. And what does the organisation British Blind Sports do? What current projects have you guys got going on? But also, what's your involvement with it?
Yeah, so British Blind Sport as a whole is obviously a charitable organisation, and we were established way back in 1976. And the vision today is very much to empower all visually impaired people to get active and enjoy sport. Now, as an organisation, we offer usually around 30 different sporting events across the year. And those things sort of consist of things like Have a Go days, which are like, we'll have a multi-sports day where people can try different sports. And if they like them, they would then go off to the clubs and the organisations and the deliverers in those local areas and hopefully access them on a regular basis. As well as that, we offer family days, which are in line with our First Steps project, which is a project designed for children aged 3 to 11. And it ultimately tries to help develop their fundamental motor skills, around catching, passing, coordination, being able to run, just what every child would normally do. Unfortunately, the visually impaired children do sometimes not have the same opportunities in mainstream environments to do such things. And that's just down to people not quite understanding sight loss. Other projects that we have going on at the moment, we have the See My Voice project, which has just ended, which was a leadership-based project, which basically would provide opportunities for young people to develop and complete work experience, gain coaching qualifications. And that's now progressed into something called the Youth Advisory Panel, with a group of 12 young people aged 16 to 24 that are ultimately going to act as the voice for the nation's young VI people and campaign to make sport more inclusive by educating, teaching and sharing their experiences. And then with obviously the ongoing pandemic, we've been running a active at home exercise program, which is developed throughout the pandemic. It's a little bit different now to what it was, but I suppose we can talk about that in a bit more detail in a moment or so.
So obviously you've just mentioned the at-home sporting sessions and the active at-home program. How are they run, and what type of things would that entail?
So initially, when sort of the virtual delivery began, it started with the live workout Wednesday, and what we would do, we'd have a different inclusive deliverer deliver one live session every Wednesday, which the VI community would access via Zoom. As that has sort of progressed and developed over the months, we now have changed it to something called Active at Home. So the program now operates with, at the beginning of every month, we have all 5 of our inclusive deliverers do one session each evening of the week at 6 p.m. Now, after that week has taken place, our deliverers then provide follow-on sessions, which are pre-recorded, which then we would then send to our service users and participants so they can continue on their, exercise regime. The reason we've done it like this now is to allow them to create a more stable and more regular exercise routine, and it keeps them a little bit more accountable. And then once we return them back to the live format at the beginning of the next month, they can then see how they've progressed and challenge themselves a little bit further. The idea is basically to just do the same thing week in, week out, basically. So yeah, really great feedback from it, and we constantly want to improve it. And yeah, looking forward to continuing obviously on the project in the coming months. And it's something I think we're keen to continue even when the pandemic's over, because I think there's a real appetite for online exercise at the moment.
No, absolutely. And that sounds really great, how the program has kind of slowly developed itself and adapted and changed over time depending on people's needs and stuff. I think that's really good to see. Would you say that there have been any challenges working with the disabled community, but also working with them from home as well?
In terms of the challenges, I think that's a really good question, particularly with the visually impaired community. For me, I don't see it as a challenge working with someone who's visually impaired. I find it very rewarding, but there are many barriers in place, particularly around things like, the accessibility of software. We've tried different things like the Zoom, Google Meets, and then Microsoft Teams, for example, and not all of that software suits visually impaired or those who are completely blind.
Yeah.
We have found that Zoom is a little bit more accessible because there are shortcut keys, and if they do have screen readers, there is some audio that can go with whatever they're trying to click or type, etc. But with this sort of current age, I suppose online software has really come to light, and it's being used now more than ever. So it's more trying to educate. That's the biggest challenge, I suppose.
Yeah.
Many of the people within the visually impaired community are not confident on the internet. So helping and supporting them can be a challenge, but it's not the biggest challenge out there. There's far greater challenges, in terms of the lack of education and understanding around sight loss. There is a stigma, I suppose, in society that someone with a disability can't do something. We focus on what their disability is rather than what their abilities are.
Yeah.
And I think more than ever now, it's important to focus on their abilities. So trying to educate them, teachers, sports and physical activity professionals, and have them, understand the barriers that the visually impaired community face, will allow them to better understand how to adapt and support those individuals, whether that's online or in person. And at BBS, we've got lots of resources that can support with that on our website, as well as a CPD course that was developed with UK coaching.
No, that sounds like a really, really great achievements that have been going on. Have you personally had any kind of high moments or real kind of breakthrough moments working with the blind community as well?
I have, but I suppose overall with the disability sports sector, I think a real big turning point, particularly in this country and farther afield, the London 2012 Paralympics really opened up society's eyes to what these people are capable of. And then also, those minority disability groups like the visually impaired or those who have got mobility issues, they really began to become inspired by what they were seeing on the television. Personally for me, witnessing, an individual have fun and enjoying playing sports, particularly when they've had bad experiences in the past, I find that very rewarding.
Yeah.
And I mean, if you're coaching an individual or teaching an individual something, when you see them, or that light bulb moment where it all clicks, it's really, really rewarding. It could be something simple as a 4-year-old boy being able to catch a ball, or someone who later down the line, as an adult who's not participated in sport, is just able to go out and run with a guide, for example. That sense of freedom, they're the things that I feel are the real high moments, and that's what I enjoy most, I suppose, about working within this sector.
No, absolutely. And obviously, so you mentioned the 2012 Olympics, and you've mentioned kind of the growth of it. Do you think, and just one final question, do you think that grassroots disability sports from the grassroots level right the way up to the professional leagues, do you think that it's on the rise and gaining popularity?
I definitely think it is on the rise. Obviously, with the pandemic, it's put a little bit of a stop to some of it. When we look back to London 2012, and I suppose the Paralympic movement before that, we've now come to a point where elite disability sport is being played alongside what we consider elite able-bodied sport.
Yeah.
Which in previous years, when we look back maybe to the 80s when we had the Olympics in Russia, the Russian Olympic Committee said that they had no disabled athletes, so there's no need for a Paralympic Games, and the Paralympic Games were completely isolated and actually took place in a different country. Wow. Where now they take place side by side and they're celebrated together. And then you have instances where we've actually seen, athletes with a disability compete alongside other able-bodied athletes. So it really has opened up people's eyes, like I said, around what is possible. And that then, I suppose, is filtered down to the grassroots level. But there does need to be something at grassroots level to allow for that progression for people to get to the elite. And I think that gap between grassroots and elite level disability sport is slowly closing. I'd like to think at some point in time that every individual with a disability could just go to their local sports organisation or club and take part and join in with everybody else, regardless of, where they come from or their background. When we look at junior sports at, like football or rugby, young boys and girls will play alongside each other until a certain age, and then they obviously separate and play women's football or men's football. It would be lovely to see disabled groups playing alongside some of the other members in the community, regardless of their disability, and having more of a focus on, actually, this person can do this and they can join in. That would be great, and it creates a more inclusive environment. We are a long way off that, but there is a need to have specific disability clubs and organisations to ensure that there's a fair and even playing field.
No, I completely agree with that. And that's some really good points that you've made. I didn't actually know about the Russian incident when they obviously disallowed or didn't recognise disability athletes as.
No, it's something that I wasn't massively aware of, and I'd done a podcast with a gentleman who'd worked with British Blind Sport previously, called Mike Brace, and he was a former Paralympic skier. And he's been heavily involved in part of the Paralympic movement, and he is a fantastic ambassador for disability sports. He shared a story with me about that incident because he actually competed at those games. Like, you wouldn't have thought those things would be happening in times like, now and then, because, although the 1980s was, 30 years ago, it was still, quite recent. And yeah, I just find it fascinating that how it's developed, and now we're at a position now where we're more inclusive than ever, and we need to keep smashing down those boundaries and those brick walls that are preventing the minority disability groups from being able to exercise or take part in regular sporting activities.
No, absolutely. I think you've made some really good points there. That's all I've got for today. I just wanted to say a massive thanks for coming on the call.
No, thank you for your time, Patrick, and I really appreciate it. It's been a pleasure.
It's been lovely talking to you.
Thank you, and I hope you have a lovely day, and stay safe, and speak to you soon, pal.
And yourself. Cheers. Bye.
Thank you.
That's all we've got time for this week. Thank you to David for coming on the show with us. It was great listening to you. And again, massive thanks to our audience at home for listening as well. If you haven't already, please like and subscribe to our Facebook, our Twitter, our YouTube or our LinkedIn at Social CIC. That's all we've got time for this week. Stick around for next episodes. Bye.